Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Goblins and Growlers podcast. I'm your host, Josh Maltby at Black Cloak DM on Twitter.
And I'm the other host, Brandon Dingus, at Way of Brandalore on Twitter, Instagram, and probably Discord, depending on what server you're in. Josh, how are you doing tonight?
Oh, pretty well, pretty well. I have a lot of sleep debt that I need to make up to myself that I will not be doing tonight because I'll be at work at 8:30 tomorrow morning.
Yeah, personally, I'm waiting for Biden to forgive my sleep debt. Because there's no way I'm going to be able to pay it back.
Oh, if only that were possible.
Yeah, we're coming to you all at another late night. We got on this call about an hour and a half ago and did a lot of strategy stuff. And now it's 9 o'clock that we're recording this. I've had a late night cup of coffee. This is just the way our lives are now. I'm surprised we got started this early, all things considered.
I mean, I think part of that is that the topic we have for tonight is one that we were both like, let's make sure that we've got all our ducks in a row before we really dive on in there.
I would say we got most of our ducks in a row, perhaps not all of them, but we've kind of decided that this episode is going to be a nice little news roundup. It's actually been probably a month since the last time we recorded because the two previous episodes, the G. Edward Patterson interviews, we recorded those all in one go to try to buy ourselves a little bit of time to relax. And a handful of things that has happened since then. And, I'm sure some people are like, oh, yeah, why are you talking about this? This is weeks late. But not everybody's as plugged into stuff, including me, really, for the last month. So a lot of people will probably find some new information here. Others just might enjoy listening to us talk about things they're already familiar with and perhaps share opinions with you on.
Well, and some of this information will be new as of the week previous to recording. So
True.
we do have some fresh news. It's not all fresh news, but we do have some fresh news.
Yeah, that's fine. And and I keep reminding myself, not everybody's as plugged into this stuff. So if you're not looking at the ins and outs of the day to day of Wizards of the Coast, a lot of this is probably fresh to you. But got a handful of things to get rolling on. Josh, do you have anything up at the top that we need to touch base on before we get into like our content warning and stuff?
Nothing I can think of. Just, as we talk about some rather heavy and serious stuff, know that we love all of you.
Yeah. People are probably aware, at least in some tertiary way, about the Wizards lawsuit with new TSR. And it's a lot of racially focused stuff. And we're going to be reading some stuff from the actual injunction filing. So just, be aware. Be aware. We're not going to go too deep into it, but I do think it's important to read verbatim some of this stuff that they're talking about because it's important.
Yeah, we'll give another warning when we're about to jump into that content itself so that you can start skipping forward and not stop until you hear us laughing again.
Yeah. I'll be laughing shrieks of anger as we're reading that, but just because I just can't believe those idiots. But we'll get to that.
Kind of amazing.
Yeah, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So the first thing is there's a new head of Dungeons and Dragons now, which they just announced actually like yesterday. I think that we're recording this. I didn't get a phone alert on it until this afternoon, which speaks a little bit probably to how quickly Android is able to turn these things around and tell you about them. But there's a new senior vice president for Hasbro, and he's the SVP for the Dungeons and Dragons brand overall. His name's Dan Rawson, and we creeped his LinkedIn because that's the kind of thing you do these days. And it was funny. We were reading the press release just talking about, this is like a lifelong dream for me to be here and everything like that. And the first couple of paragraphs of the press release, it talks about how his most recent position was at Microsoft. Like they hired him away from Microsoft. He was the chief operating officer for Dynamics 365. So he was basically handling all the 365 suite stuff. And I immediately thought, oh, they're hiring him because of the D&D Beyond acquisition and the transition over into one D&D. And then sure enough, we get to like a paragraph in that, and it says, oh, him being here will really be a boon to our digital operations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the president of Wizards of the Coast, her name's Cynthia. Gosh, I feel awkward.
Williams.
Yeah, Cynthia Williams. She, up until earlier this year, also worked for Microsoft, and they worked together. So she clearly recruited him from there to take over this aspect of the operation. I think a couple of things about this. Number one, it shows just how committed they are to the digital future of Dungeons and Dragons. I've seen a lot of this to less success during my time in the newspaper industry. Really sort of owning it by putting somebody in charge of that who has that kind of digital expertise. It'll probably work here, but I think it's interesting. It shows a level of commitment on their part to really making the digital version of D&D. Like one D&D online is going to be D&D. There's still going to be the books, but I'm seeing the same thing from news industry evolution, just faster. Like they'll still be the books, but we're now going to be a legacy product. The people who consume the books, the primary product from Wizards of the Coast for Dungeons and Dragons is going to be the online software as a service situation, essentially.
I still kind of disagree with that because I think the books sell well enough that they're unlikely to give up a lot of market share there. I think what we're going to see is that the online, subscribe, have the service. I think that's going to be a lot more of their test bed for how these things go. And then after they've got a couple of months of it live, then they'll publish books. I don't think it's going to be a super huge gap, but I suspect the online folks will see it content just a little bit earlier, but also a little bit less refined. That's my personal opinion.
I think we're talking about the same thing, but we're looking at it a little bit differently. I'm not talking about the books as a legacy product to the exclusion of the digital product. Like the books are still very much going to be a focus for them because they have to maintain relationships with their brick and mortar partners. They're not about to abandon that. And it is a huge revenue stream for them. And there's old people like me who prefer the books instead of doing it all digitally. I've tried so many different solutions for moving my media to digital, like my book media, and I just don't like it. There's nothing wrong with it. I just don't like it. I would rather have a book in my hand. So they're still very much catering to customers like me by doing that. But I think they're looking at it long term. And I think as we go another 10, 15, 20 years down the road, this strategy is really going to play itself out as we see the slow phasing out of the physical D&D release schedule for books. We're seeing like 6 next year that they've announced that we did that episode on. Listen back about a month or so ago for that. And maybe in 10 years they're releasing 4, 15 years they're releasing 3, something like that. I think tastes and habits are going to change over the next 2 decades that are going to obsolesce the books. And it's easy to say it's not going to happen, but this is also what people were saying 30 years ago for the newspaper industry and really the publishing industry too, when the internet and digital became such a thing. There's very much a sort of sensual object aspect for having these books, having physical dice, things like that. Playing at the table is probably never going to go away, but as we see increasing ubiquity with I say increasing ubiquity, tablets are just freaking everywhere. Tablets, phones, everything. Like they're already ubiquitous. But as people in 20 years, when people like me are entering their 60s, it's going to be so much different. I think there's going to be so many fewer people who are playing games with like physical book media. They'll still have dice probably, but I think character sheets, source books, and all that stuff, it's not even going to be source books. It's going to be essentially source wikis, which is where we're seeing things going anyway with the digital books on D&D Beyond. Like that's all it's all going to be. I'm really going down a rabbit hole on this and getting a little bit off topic, but all that to say, that's where I see the product going. And I think hiring Dan Rawson is a clear indication that that's also where they see the ultimate future of the product. And like I said, I'm thinking long term on that. I don't think you're wrong about anything you said. I think definitely short to midterm, that's exactly how it's going to go. But we wouldn't be podcasters if we weren't recklessly speculating on the future of something with which we're not intimately involved. So I think definitely they are targeting this as the first salvo in a much larger digital shift.
Yeah, I will say I don't want to be the guy who says, "Oh, we'll never move away from CDs," because we all
eight
saw
tracks,
how
my
that
brother,
happened.
8 tracks.
We all saw how that went down when streaming services really started to take off. All of a sudden, CD sales are like, no one ever gets platinum anymore. Gee, I wonder why. And it's like, well, yeah, because the one song everybody really wanted to hear, they don't have to buy the album to hear it over and over and over again. They just download the one track. So I I don't think, how to put this. I don't think that physical media is ever going to fully go away, because I think there's always going to be people who find a special place in their hearts for those special release books. I think there's absolutely the possibility that some of the more experimental stuff they do, some of the modules, some of the individual adventures, some of the like characters or creatures or NPCs or whatever it may be, like those individual pieces, I think we'll see more and more of those getting individual releases online before they see any sort of physical print. And then I think whatever's popular will get collected into something like a Fizzband's treasury and then get published, because they'll be like, oh, here's all the most popular stuff. And here it is for about how much you'd pay for it online, but you get the beautiful physical copy with this custom illustration on the front.
About 12, 15 years ago in the newspaper industry, we were talking about that very same strategy, and we called it reverse publishing, which is exactly what they're going to be doing. Like they're going to be doing exactly what you said, because it's the next natural step where you iterate online and then you publish the essentially the top 5 in a physical book.
Yeah. And this is, of course, all assuming that 10, 15, 20 years from now, we don't have a group of kids that are like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm tired of always having stuff on my phone all the time. Don't you always want to like get a book open and like unfold it in front of you, and treating it like the vinyl community?
Future,
you know what I mean?
I was about to yell future vinyl hipsters. They're gonna peg their future jeans and their like auto lacing Nikes and go into like a used bookstore.
Hop off their hoverboard to walk on in.
Why are we talking about all this technology from the past, like hoverboards and auto lacing Nikes? That was so like 7 years ago.
If only that was so 7 years ago.
I remember back in 1990 when Back to the Future 2 came out, all the schoolyard rumors about, no, hoverboards really exist out in California, but they can't sell them because that kid got hurt and he eventually died.
Yep. No, it makes perfect sense. It
Yeah.
all adds up. My
Yeah.
uncle at Nintendo told me.
Yeah, I knew several guys in elementary school who had uncles at Nintendo, which was really, that's a weird coincidence in southern West Virginia. But talking a little bit more about Dan
maybe
Rawson.
It's all the same uncle.
Yeah. I should be offended at that, but I want to keep this rolling. Because I think it was an incest joke.
No, it wasn't an incest. There was that guy's brother got around joke is what that was.
Oh, okay. All right. Wink to the audience. But talking about Dan Rawson some more, just beyond what I think his higher presages for the future of the brand, he does appear to be qualified for it. Looking on his LinkedIn, he was the general manager and vice president for marketplace and customer experience at Coupang, which is a Korean e-commerce market. He did that for 3 years. It looks like he quit and went to Microsoft right as the pandemic was revving up there in March of 2020. So I guess he got back to the United, because he was in Seoul. So he got back to the United States just in time, it seems like.
Wow.
Before that, he was in India as the head of customer logistics and supply chain ecosystems for a company called Flipkart. Before that, he was at Amazon for a few years, general manager, North American fulfillment, and senior manager, product management. He has like a ton more experience credits. Like he was at Dell for like 3 years as mobility solutions and global transformation strategy roles. He was director of land acquisition for something called Hamlet Development about 12 years ago.
Huh.
So that's interesting. And also he's a captain in the U.S. Marine Corps. So that's interesting.
I
So I think
I
go ahead.
I can't help but feel like with all these job titles that you're listing off for all these different companies he's worked for, like the more you say, the more I picture some like middle-aged white guy in a starched white button-up with a black tie and a black blazer jacket. Like,
Well, I'll tell you, he does look like a middle-aged white guy, and that's probably because he's a middle-aged white guy. Um, he looks like a relatively affable and cool middle-aged white guy.
well, that's good.
But if I haven't said middle-aged white guy enough, it's because I think perhaps at least when Dan Rawson is tired of being SVP of Dungeons and Dragons, maybe it's perhaps time to look at a different type of person for that job. Perhaps a person of color, perhaps somebody who's not a white man.
Yeah, I mean, credit for Cynthia Williams being the president, being at least a woman representing up there.
Mm-hmm.
But like, it would be nice to see a little more representation in leadership in businesses such as Wizards of the Coast because, they might make better choices overall.
And we'll talk about some of those poor choices a little bit later in this episode. But suffice it to say, I'm not throwing shade on Dan Rawson. It looks like he's super qualified. Like he's, if it means anything to you, he's a Harvard graduate. So he clearly has credentials and experience to back up being able to do this. So he's probably going to do a great job. I'm just thinking with some of the bad decisions Wizards has made content-wise over the last couple of years, it's something to think about being a little bit more representational in your leadership structures.
Oh, for sure. For absolute sure.
Yeah, because every time I watch those videos about a new D&D book coming out and they do the promotional videos interviewing the authors or Jeremy Chaplin and stuff like that, and a lot of middle-aged white men. So
Yep.
So there we go. This is a game for everybody. It is a game for everybody. It should look like everybody.
Agreed. Fully agreed.
At all levels.
It's a game for everybody. It should be made by everybody.
Correct. Do you have anything else on this item?
No, I think we covered everything pretty well. I'm hopeful for the future. I think the online focus will be an interesting thing to keep tabs on. Hopefully it doesn't cut into physical sales too much. I say as someone who's engaged to a comic book store owner.
Mm-hmm. Worst decision ever, Dungeons and Dragons. Item number 2 on the docket tonight is a little bit lighter, and it's also something I don't particularly care that much about, but some people may find it interesting. Josh, you know that Dungeons and Dragons movie that they're making?
Yeah.
The one with Chris Pine in it?
Yeah.
So it's getting 2 prequel novels that are going to come out before the movie. And to me, that almost straddles the line of whether or not they're a prequel because they're coming out before the movie. You see what I'm saying? Like if episodes 1, 2, and 3 had come out before episodes 4, 5, and 6, they wouldn't be called the prequel trilogy. They would be called the first trilogy.
I think there's a little bit of room for discussion here because I suspect the movie was written, like what the plot was going to be, probably a lot of what the script was going to be, and all the character names before these books were even started on.
I mean, you're probably right about that, but also I think it's bold to release these before the movie, like have 2 of these that are probably also already written completely now and will be coming out before the movie.
Yeah, I guess they could have just as easily called them tie-in books.
Right.
And been a little bit more, there's less room for argument there, but maybe that's the whole idea, Brandon. Maybe this is part of their marketing scheme, is to get us arguing about whether or not they're actually prequels so that we talk about them more.
Yeah, I guess so. Anyways, these are. I mean, it's working. I'm very gullible. So they're called the Druid's Call, and then the other one is the Road to Neverwinter, and they're going to come out in February of 2023. And then the D&D movie Honor Among Thieves is gonna release on March 3rd. So it looks like we'll have maybe like 3 to 4 weeks between when these come out and the movie comes out, which is actually kind of not a lot of time for busy people to sit down and read two like fantasy novels. If you got a lot going on, because these are probably going to be, around 300 pages or something like that. You'd have to kill a weekend day or a couple of evenings on something like that. I don't read as fast as I used to. I would have released one of them at Christmas and one of them at the end of January. But that's me.
I mean, fair. I will say they might not actually be that long, because based on the cover image I'm looking at right now, which is a lovely cover image, by the way, these very likely could be like pocket novel kind of books where it's nothing super thick. It's only like 180 to 220 pages. You know, decent sized pages, but not like super small font on them. So,
Yeah.
I could see very easily these being reasonable reads that are fairly quick to get through, not least of which because they're movie tie-in books, and those are tough to write, and they're even tougher to sell.
I know, and I mean, yeah, and I know, like, as far as the density of the language here, it's not going to be Stanislav Lem or anything like that. This isn't going to be D&D Solaris, so it should be pretty easy. But I don't know. That just feels weird to me. Like you could release them consecutively rather than simultaneously, and that could like draw out the marketing line a little bit, especially given the bad mouth taste reputation of D&D at the movies that we've had for the last 20 years. Apologies to both Jeremy Irons and Marlon Wayans, because I saw that movie in the theater.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. I saw it in the theater with a woman I really liked in college, and we were just really bummed by it. So this, I have not really paid too much attention to Honor Among Thieves, to be honest. I've seen like the teaser trailer that they released. I don't know if they've even released a full trailer for it yet. It feels like we're maybe like right on the cusp of that being a thing. Usually you start seeing those 5 to 6 months early. Like,
Yeah, I guess we've had a teaser trailer. We haven't had like a plot trailer. I think we've had 2 teaser trailers.
Mhm. I have my suspicions on what the plot's going to look like. And we can speculate on that in a minute. But let's see. Druid's Call, and I'm reading from the Gizmodo article now. I don't know which one you had up on the screen there. Druid's Call, as the name implies, will follow Sophia Lilly's character from the film, Doric, a tiefling druid we saw in a trailer, mostly delighting us by wild shifting into an owlbear. And then, let's see, what does it say about... less is known about the Road to Neverwinter at the minute, but as the name implies, we'll likely be paying a visit to the infamous Jewel of the North, one of Faerun's most powerful and cosmopolitan city-states. So that tells me, well, I mean, we already knew that Honor Among Thieves is going to be very Sword Coast focused, and any curmudgeonly D&D guy is going to be like, why can't we look at any other part of the world? So Druid's Call is probably going to be very, very much focused on Sword Coast, and then Neverwinter will be the Road to Neverwinter. I think sort of explains what it's going to be. They're going to go to Neverwinter and do something, and I'm sure it'll all have them meet it. The last scene of each book, of both books, will have them meeting in a place where the movie will pick up, and they will be a ragtag group brought together, summoned by a mysterious person to pull a job, and they go to pull the job, and then one of them betrays the team, and it's not going to be Chris Pine, or it will be Chris Pine, and then he'll have a crisis of conscience, and he will double flip and betray his betrayer, because he's made real connection with these people, because it's going to be like Fast and the Furious, and now these people are like family to him, and then the movie will end with them getting away with something, and then there'll be a post-credit sequence where somebody, maybe, I don't know, a lich or something like that, Vecna or something, is really mad because maybe it turns out what they had to steal was a phylactery or something like that, and he wants it back. And then we have D&D 2, honor among thieves, but like the T in thieves is a 2.
So honor among Tuheeves.
Mm-hmm.
I can say based on the teaser trailer, I don't know that you're real far off. There's a little bit there that's different. Like the whole thing is that they've already done a job and then found out the job they did was for the bad guys. So they're trying to undo the job they did. And that's where it's theoretically that's where the honor among thieves title comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But you may very well be right that it's one of those like double meaning titles where it's like, but the real honor among thieves is the friends we made along the way.
The friends we stole along the way. Yeah, I admit I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to that trailer when I watched it, but I have a sneaking suspicion that the film is going to be extremely formulaic in that way. And that doesn't mean it's bad, because I'm a huge fan of MCU films and they are all unapologetically formulaic, and I don't care because I like watching Iron Man on a big screen.
Based on the teaser trailer, I think we can expect a lot of MCU style, like, gosh, isn't this a zany adventure we're on kind of dialogue, because that's par for the course right now in Hollywood.
Tony Stark ruined it for everyone.
Kind of.
There cannot be a serious tense moment in a film because of Robert Downey Jr.
I mean, like, Robert Downey Jr. crushed that role by being as Robert and Downey and Jr. as he possibly could be at that time. And like, I loved the film. I'm a little upset that every movie now needs to have dialogue like that.
Well, you find a formula and you exploit it until it stops working.
Well, I'm getting close. I'm getting close to it stopping working for me. And I'm a man of great patience and a broad appreciation for cinema.
You can just go back and watch some old films.
Yeah, Dad. These films are for the youths.
Like Escape from New York.
Oh, hell yeah. I would absolutely watch some Escape from New York.
And its less quality sequel, Escape from LA, which I saw at a movie theater in Myrtle Beach.
Oh, hell yeah. You know what had good dialogue and snappy comebacks back in my day?
What's that?
Was They Live. That was a movie with put hair on your chest.
With Rowdy Roddy Piper, who has his own racial controversies.
Well, we won't get into that.
Yeah. He's here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, but he's all out of gum.
Yep.
Anything more on this movie? Do you want to speculate about this movie, Annie?
I mean, I feel like we're going to get a real trailer soon, and it's going to immediately burn everything that you and I have said about it. If I was to do a little bit of wild speculation, I think we're going to find out that the wild shaping into an owl bear thing will turn out to be something that Wizards is actually introducing as a character feature in a new module or something like that in 2023. I don't know what that looks like, but I suspect that's part of it.
I think we're all going to be surprised because we're going to find out that it's not actually wild shifting or wild shaping or anything. It's they're rolling out a brand new like class or race, and it's going to be Animorphs.
Oh God. Oh, you want to talk about things that are unexpectedly dark? Animorphs. It's here for you.
Yeah. If you stay in your wild form for too long, you get stuck and there's nothing to be done. Somebody has to cast polymorph on you.
Not just that. That entire book series is all about like war crimes.
Yeah.
Like it is an intensely dark series.
I know. The Nickelodeon show did not do justice to the darkness of the book series.
I'm so surprised. I was going to say...
You're either drunk or Sean Connery.
Neither. I was going to say shocked, and then I wanted to say surprised, but I'd already started saying sheesh. So here we are.
It is late.
It is late.
20 till
Uh,
10.
let's get into the next thing we're going to talk about. The next
Yeah.
thing
Yeah. This
is
content warning. Um, this is where we'll probably talk about a lot of racism related stuff and people saying dumb, hurtful things.
yeah, and to be clear, we are on the side of these are dumb and hurtful things that these people are saying, and we would also like them to stop it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the bottom line for this, for anybody who might be sort of uninitiated to this, is, in the beginning there was TSR, Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson, and it was great. It was 1974. Things rolled on until like 1997, and then Wizards of the Coast bought TSR. Wizards of the Coast still used the TSR logo on a lot of stuff. If you go to Drive Through RPG and do it, like look at any of their print on demand stuff from that era, from like pre 1997, it's going to have the TSR logo on it. They still use it. So what's happened is, and this is a long and complicated story, so just boiling it down, is Gary Gygax is one of his sons, Ernie Gygax, has started a new company called TSR, and a lot colloquially people are referring to it as New TSR. Ernie Gygax has said terrible things. I'm not going to slander him by calling him a terrible person or anything like that, but you can look up stuff he said and opinions he holds and things like that. Josh and I do not agree. I pardon me for being presumptive, Josh, for speaking for you there, but
I I think you can pretty definitively say that I do not agree with basically anything that Ernie Gygax has said in an interview about how Wizards of the Coast is running things, the existence of trans people, any basically just blanket statement. If Ernie Gygax has said it and I have not expressly agreed with it, odds are good I disagree with it.
and the TLDR on Ernie Gygax and his ilk is they are basically the old stereotype of tabletop role playing game players. Just like, this is for us. This isn't for you. Very insular about it, not welcoming or anything like that. It's cliquishness to just sort of the nth degree. They really don't agree with the way that the hobby has gone in the last few years, which is to become more open and welcoming to all kinds of different folks. At least that's what a lot of us, are trying to do. They're mad because this thing that they like is becoming somebody else's thing. So they founded this new TSR in sort of a response to that, saying things like, we're bringing gaming back to what it should be, and getting mad about Wizards being quote unquote woke and things like that. Just the usual bullshit that you see from people who are just mad about the world changing because they don't like it and they choose not to try to understand it. It's not that they don't understand it. They're making a conscious choice not to educate themselves and understand it and have empathy for people. So don't ever let somebody use the excuse of, well, I don't understand it, and that's why I don't like it. If you don't understand it, make an effort to understand it, and then you can talk to me about it. But I don't tolerate that kind of bullshit. But anyways, so they start this company, and they're like, hey, we're going to release Star Frontiers, which was an old 1982 sort of like Starfinder-esque setting from TSR. But Wizards actually owns that. And they have been like publishing it through drive-through, made it available for like print on demand stuff through drive-through RPG for a long time. And the like a lot of the marketing language for this new Star Frontiers is like, oh, it's reviving the classic game, and Wizards is like, yeah, but like the classic game you're referring to is a thing that we own, that we bought in 1997. So it's owned and licensed by Wizards of the Coast. Now and we'll read some stuff from the injunction filing that Wizards did, but there's an argument that Wizards didn't actively renew their trademark on like TSR or Star Frontiers or whatever, but they're still publishing stuff through with those names, with those logos. because like the way obligatory. I am not a lawyer. Noah can call in and correct me if he wants to at some point. But even if your trademark expires, as long as you're still using it, you essentially have the leg up in any kind of like filing or anything like that. And also, since TSR is like a stylized logo and it doesn't mean anything like intrinsically by itself, like that logo is still protected. Again, I am not a lawyer. Do not look to me for any kind of advice if you're experiencing some sort of trademark issue. I happen to know a good lawyer and I'm happy to put him in touch with you. Contact at goblinsandgrowlers.com and I can give you some contact info for that person. But anyway, so Wizards filed an injunction to stop new TSR from publishing this. And there's a history. And before we started recording this, Josh was reading through the new TSR timeline to just illustrate what jokers these guys are, because they keep running into these issues all the time and they're doing all kinds of like comical clown shoes bullshit that no respectable business is probably going to do. I don't know if you still have that up and if you want to just go through a couple of bullet points on it, Josh.
I mean, there's things like, oh god, TSR Con takes place at the same time as Gary Con. TSR claims, lol, actually, we asked just about every one of the 800 people stopping by TSR Con, and about 60% had no idea Gary Con was going on, and we tried pushing them over to go attend. And that's March 26th, 2022. Like, it's honestly like so much of what they are saying is occurring that also is impossible to verify because no one is coming out and being like, oh yeah, I'm one of these people that they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So much of it ends up reading like things Donald Trump claims, like it just where it's just really really blatant lies.
Ernie Gygax coming out there saying like, I don't know, that's what I'm hearing. A lot of people are saying this.
Right, like, oh my god, it's not great. It's not great.
Yeah.
And it's all like it's all stuff where they're like, we clearly have a right to these things, even though because Wizards has just been letting these properties languish, and Wizards is like, no, we haven't. We've been selling all of those on our online store. What
like,
are you talking about?
We're not actively developing new stuff for it, but we still have the license if you want to buy the old stuff, which we're making available to you in a format if you want it.
Well, also, a lot of Star Frontiers content got mixed up and created Spelljammer content.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, yeah, they are actually producing new stuff with some of that
Now, before we get too deep into this, there is something I want to mention. There's actually two things I want to mention. First is Wizards can't actually like confirm that TSR was distributing Star Frontiers New Genesis, which is the name of the rebooted Star Frontiers. They're saying that the website listed Star Frontiers quote reboot using the trademarks, but it was listed as out of stock. So it was like listed for sale, but it was listed out of stock. So they can't show evidence that it was actually being distributed, but I think they're just basing their claim on the intent. And also some playtest releases had gotten out that were, it sounds like, gifted rather than sold. And of course, the second part of this that we haven't really gotten into, but you can probably guess since we've talked about what kind of people these guys are and that we did a content warning on this. There's just some like wild offensive stuff in this new Star Frontiers thing, racist stuff, anti-trans stuff. It's beyond the pale, because honestly, before I read this, I had not read the actual excerpts until just before we started recording this, but I was just sort of generally aware that it was problematic content, and I didn't feel like I had to investigate it too much because it's known actors who are doing this and I sort of know what they're all about, so I could probably guess it, but it still surprised me. I'm going to read, if you don't mind, Josh, I'm going to read for just a minute from the injunction filing on page 9. Um,
Yep.
Gaming publications began covering a quote playtest release of Star Frontier's New Genesis, essentially a preview copy that counterclaim defendants, that's Wizards, distributed to, or no, not counterclaim defendants. Counterclaim defendants are TSR, that counterclaim defendants distributed to players who are interested in trying the game. The game utilized marks containing, and the marks that they're referring to is TSR and Star Frontiers, those trademarks, and contained alarming content stating, for example, that, quote, races in Star Frontier's New Genesis are not unlike races in the real world. Some are better at certain things than others, and some races are superior to others, end quote. Now, that in and of itself is a tremendous problem, but I shall go on. And I remind you again, content warning, and I am reading directly from the legal filing. Um,
Ugh.
a quote Negro race is described as a quote sub race in the game and as having quote average intelligence with maximum intelligence rating of 9, while the quote Norse race has a minimum intelligence rating of 13. And then there's an actual screen grab from the book, and it says like I am just honest to God shocked that it's 2022 and I'm about to say this, but it says the bullet point, it's describing the race that it's talking about, and it says bullet point Negro, parenthesis subrace Ulfar, parenthesis humanoid class, tall, thick-bodied, dark-skinned, even purple, dark brown-eyed race with large strength, average intelligence. All attributes are in the 10 plus range except intelligence, which is a maximum of +9. And then right under that you have bullet point Nordic, bullet point Ulfar, or no, parenthesis Ulfar, parenthesis humanoid class. Now keep that in mind, because for the one above it said a subrace of Ulfar, and then this is Ulfar. So it's essentially saying black people are a subhuman race by their comparison. And these folks are described as tall, blonde, blue-eyed race with exceptional attributes and powers, all attributes in the 13 plus range. Now, I mean, come on. Like, what the hell is that?
You
That's
know,
ridiculous.
it's stuff like that that makes you start to wonder what kind of person would write this garbage, because
What
it's
kind of
pretty heinous.
what
It's
kind of person
pretty
would
heinous.
publish this garbage? It's one thing to write it, it's another thing for somebody to be like, I'm going to pay money for other people to get this, to make it available for people. And then under that, it says the game also describes, quote, latent issues with certain races, like, quote, blacks having issues with sickle cell anemia, with anemia misspelled, by the way, and with family issues, end quote. What? And then it's another image capture from the actual book, and it says, think about your race carefully, as some races are more superior in power, etc. Some races have latent issues similar to blacks having issues with sickle cell anemia and with family issues. Remember, racism is bad. Don't do racial things like racism. Have fun with it, but remember, some races are just sometimes superior in some ways. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. It's very serious, it's very awful, but part of me does actually want to get a poster that says, don't do racial things like racism.
I
Like,
just I just want this person to stop. Just stop.
what the hell is this? I'm just kind of agog at the whole thing. Like, they wrote all this, it's almost like they wrote all this stuff and then they're like, oh man, this could probably be read really poorly. I know, let's put in a sentence disclaiming racism. Remember, racism is bad. Well, actually, it says, remember, I'm looking at it closer now. It says, remember, racism is bad. Don't do racial things like racism. But like, I don't know if they felt like they could just plug that in and it was going to make it okay. I mean, I'm probably giving them way too much credit for having any kind of like DEI or sensitivity outlook on this whole thing. Then after that, it says the game also refers to the Black Lives Matter movement as, quote, radical. I don't have an image capture for that, but I don't doubt it. I mean, I'm not trying to sit here like a rumor monger or something like that, but I have to imagine that that's actually there if this other stuff is there. I I have a hard time imagining what the context to include Black Lives Matter in a space RPG is. Uh, uh, Maybe it was an illusion, maybe it was an allegory, something like that. But if I don't understand, there's so much about this I don't understand. I really don't.
I can help you understand some of that. I'm not going to name the individual because he doesn't deserve the publicity, quite frankly.
Mhm.
But this person who has written so much of this particular iteration of Star Frontiers uh, has been linked to a lot of neo-Nazi sympathizing, a lot of I mean he he has a history with hateful imagery and messages. He's been doing a lot of Twitter posting. He got himself completely removed from Drive Through RPG.
Uh, and
he he
go ahead.
deserves all the bad things that happened to him.
But friends, wait, there's more. Um Reading again from the injunction filing, Star Frontier's New Genesis also contains offensive transphobic material. It includes specific gender option for the characters, quote, male slash female, no bonuses, and no trans. Uh, and then it's got a screen grab from it. Star Frontier's New Genesis core rules: gender, male, female, no bonuses, and no trans. The playtest included a comment: should we make a trans type race? Maybe trans bots. What? What? This is insane. This is every stereotype about people who play D&D just made manifest. It's so over the top stereotypical about how like your basement dwelling nerd, your archetypal basement dwelling, D&D nerd behaves, that I have a real hard time like processing the fact that this is, number one, this is real. Number two, people put it to paper. Number three, they published it. And number four, this is where I get hung up, because I wonder, did they not expect to get this kind of pushback, or did they want this kind of pushback to advertise for the kind of player they're trying to get?
I honestly think that this is them clearly stating hateful nonsense because they think it's a way for them to grow their brand name.
Mm-hmm.
Because all publicity is good publicity, baby.
Yeah. I don't tolerate this kind of stuff. Like it's really hard for me to articulate this without going off on just sort of an expletive laden rant, which I'm not going to do. But like, how do you sleep at night? Yeah, let's say that's what they're doing. Let's say that's what their strategy is, and we don't know if it is, but let's say that's their strategy. Like, how do you sleep with yourself at night, knowing that you're trying to build your brand on the back of just this sort of anonymous hate for other people? And maybe like in some of the racial stuff they were talking about, maybe they're justifying it to themselves as like, well, we're not talking about hate, we're just talking about like objective differences. But they blinded themselves to everything.
Those people who make those sorts of justifications, quite frankly, can shove a sock in it because it is hate, and they're
Mhm.
just not willing to accept that they are a hateful person.
Yeah. And so Wizards' crux on this is like, hey, this thing is number one, number one, it's full of like hateful, awful stuff that we're trying to disabuse ourselves of, and we don't want reasonable people to conclude that this is something that we're doing. Number two, we own the properties that they're trying to do this with, and we're not like, we do not allow you to do this. You're going to cause harm to our brand on this. And but fortunately, Wizards, is part of Hasbro, so it's part of $1 billion corporation, so they can afford to go to bat for this. Like, didn't new TSR try and sue Wizards like at the end of last year in December or something like that, and they had to
Yes.
had to withdraw the lawsuit because they didn't have enough money for it?
They also tried to get I think it was a GoFundMe to help them fund their lawsuit. And they just, it's weird. They couldn't get that much support for their GoFundMe. Go
Yeah.
figure.
Yeah. Yeah, they can go something else F word themselves, as far as I'm concerned. But Wizard's argument, which is it's fair. It's like we're trying really hard to get past our own problems with this kind of stuff, and we don't need you getting in here stirring the pot, like because we're actively trying to not let this stuff happen anymore. Um, do you have any?
Which,
Go ahead.
good on them for making that sort of stance and that sort of statement and using their significant legal backing to put some teeth to that statement. Because
Hmm.
it's not enough to send a letter that says, hey, you're not being very nice, and we
Yeah,
don't appreciate that. Like, you have to take people like this to court, or else they're like, well, like, that's just how I feel.
yeah. That's some nice outmoded social views you got there. Shame if something happened to him. People can believe whatever the hell they want. That's I was talking to somebody today, just sort of describing my feeling. It was a work related conversation, but I was describing some processes and stuff at work, and I was like, yeah, like there's a small, tiny libertarian part of me that's like, people should be able to, say whatever they want to say, and it's up to the consumer to let them know whether or not that's going to be a well received thing. And then I was like, but the other 99% of me is like, get out of here with this noise. Like, I, if that's all you can say, just keep it to yourself.
I mean, it's a little bit of that, and what you hear this iterated a lot is freedom of speech is not freedom from consequences.
Hmm.
Like, yeah, you get to say a thing, but you also get to be penalized for having said a really terrible thing.
Yeah, yeah, and I really don't like wishing ill on anybody, but I hope this ruins their company. Like I hope that whatever meager income they can cobble together from white nationalists who like tabletop role playing games is not enough to support anything they want to do, and it just burns to the ground.
My hope is that white nationalists pour a lot of money into saving this company just in time for them to get the pants sued off of them, and that Wizards turns around with all of that money and donates it to help marginalized groups around the US. That would be like my dream scenario. I don't think that's going to happen, but gosh, it'd be great if it did.
Yeah. All right. Do we have anything else on this particular item that we need to go through?
Well, we've got a little bit of a transition for our next item, which
Yes.
is
Yes, we do. Wizards.
for
Looking at
for
you.
us for as much as we've been talking about how good it is for Wizards to be taking this sort of action against new TSR, Wizards hasn't exactly been doing the best work themselves, keeping some of their old content from having problematic stuff in it.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Hadazee, y'all.
Yeah, now this I would wager that more people are familiar with this because this happened and was kind of out there like very shortly after we went on our sort of like month long recording hiatus. So this has been out there for a while. But honestly, Wizards, what the hell is going on with this shit? What the hell is going on with this shit? How do you let this happen? Basically, for anybody who doesn't know, Spelljammer came out recently, and they reintroduced the Hadazee, which is essentially a monkey-like race, player character race, and all of a sudden, I guess Wizards realized there was some problematic content involved in there, and they removed it. So if you get any further printings of Spelljammer, are not going to have that stuff in there. But Josh, you want to boil it down, like what the problematic stuff was there?
I mean, basically, there was a couple of aspects of it that were pretty problematic. Thing number one is that the Hadazee are a race that, according to their original lore, which I believe is, as we speak, being rewritten,
Mm-hmm.
they were magically enhanced soldiers that rose up and killed the wizard that created them.
Yeah, they were
Uh,
kidnapped and experimented on.
yeah, and it like they're referred to as things like deck apes, and it's like the the line between actual things that happened to actual African Americans in our world and what
Yeah.
is happening to this fictional race of spacefaring peoples. It's a little too close for comfort there, wizards.
Yeah,
And
there's some really solid parallels to like the Tuskegee experiment.
oh, and it's the real problem here is that wizards dipped into their old content.
Hmm.
They didn't have anyone review it properly, clearly,
Yeah.
and they published it. And it's like, oh, come on, man. Like, how is this still happening? And I said, at one point, I said to you, Brandon, I was like, there is a part of me that feels like Wizards making a mistake this stupid and this easy to correct before it reaches the public
Hmm.
almost feels like they're doing a bit of the, oh, you remember how problematic our history was, but we're fixing it. We're out here fixing it. We sure are sorry about our problematic history, though.
Hmm.
We're fixing it though. Like they want that pat on the back for doing the work that they just should have done in the first place. Because here's the thing, somebody would have, if they'd re-released the Haddazee with a less problematic backstory,
Uh-huh.
somebody would have noticed. They would
Josh,
have been like, this has been rewritten.
Let me tell you something that's going to make your head explode. Um, right. So, according to the lore, the Haddazee were kidnapped and experimented on by a wizard with the express intent to sell them as magically enhanced soldiers. They later rose up and
Uh-huh.
killed the wizard. Notable, like I'm reading this from a Gizmodo article because I actually didn't know this because I never played. I never played any sort of like non core rules races when I was playing second edition D&D back in the 90s. But it says, notably, the Haddazee were first introduced in 1982 during the second edition days of D&D, and none of this new lore was part of their backstory then.
What the hell then?
It was all new. It was all new problematic stuff.
Did they hire the dude from the
You almost named him.
did they hire the Star Frontiers guy to do
Yeah.
this one for them? Like what? Come
Yeah.
on.
It says, and again, I'm reading from the Gizmodo article because we're not journalists. We just collect things and talk about them. The backlash to this was swift, and Wizards of the Coast deleted the lore from all digital versions of Spelljammer. They also released a public apology, which I'll read in a second, saying that not all Haddazee related content was properly vetted before release. Well, no shit. Future physical editions won't feature the new Haddazee lore, and a thorough internal review is being done, which will see the company take necessary actions once it's completed. Now, one thing people have noted is that the Haddazee section did not have a credit for any kind of sensitivity reader or anything.
Gee, I wonder how that.
Yeah. And we all know the unfortunate history that D&D has with a lot of racist stuff, whether they were doing it intentionally or unintentionally, and just were sort of caught up in the culture of the time. It doesn't matter. It's not an excuse. But for example, like the Vistani in Curse of Strahd, this is one that everybody knows. They were a horrible stereotype of Roma people, and everybody knew it was bad. Everybody knew it was bad, and for 30 years they didn't do anything about it until 2020, when racial equality and representation became a much bigger conversation nationally again. And then they're like, oh, let's we took a hard look at this and decided to go back and change that and eliminate that from any future printings of Strahd. And I mean, that's just bullshit. They knew it was a problem. They waited until it became advantageous to them from a publicity standpoint to make a change. They were forced into a corner on it.
How do you keep
Yeah.
this is what sensitivity readers are for. This is why you're paying sensitivity readers. And oh my God. Like, how could you?
Well, in this case, this is why you should pay sensitivity readers.
Yes.
It's not why you are paying them.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's like they are paying sensitivity readers. Why didn't they have them read this content? Because any sensitivity reader would have been like, why?
We just got done having this conversation about like races in D&D and what did that mean? And no, maybe not all dark elves are evil now. You know, like there has to be more nuance and more of like a real, like less homogenous culture, because everybody's different and we have to acknowledge that. We just talked about, like, that was just the thing. That was the conversation a few months ago as they were getting ready to do all this stuff for 1D&D. That's just insane to me that they dropped the ball like this. I can't believe it, because it's such a dereliction of their, like, I mean, it's a dereliction of good practice and a dereliction of the responsibility they've taken on themselves to clean up a lot of this stuff. Like, you can't
Well,
expect it all to get done in just one fell swoop. But you would think, with as much attention that was on Spelljammer and as much work in the years that they put into getting ready to re-release that, not once did anybody raise any kind of question about the race of monkey humanoids that were enslaved and rose up to kill their captors. Are you kidding me?
it just I this feels like the sort of thing that they should be beyond at this point. That they should D&D beyond.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Like
want
it
to go ahead.
going back and doing these sorts of things, it's like, have you learned? Have you really learned? Because it's
Mhm.
starting to feel like you haven't.
Yeah. I'm going to read the full text of their public apology. And this is dated September 2nd. Like I said, this happened a while ago, but we're playing a little bit of catch up. And, you know, maybe some people know about it, maybe some people don't. Uh, it starts. We wanted to acknowledge and own the inclusion of offensive material with our recent Spelljammers Adventures in Space content. We failed you, our players and our fans, and we are truly sorry. The campaign includes a people called the Hadazee, which first appeared in 1982. Regrettably, not all portions of the content relating to the Hadazee were properly vetted before appearing in our most recent release. As we continue to learn and grow through every situation, we recognize that to live our values, we have to do better. Throughout the 50-year history of Dungeons and Dragons, some of the characters in the game have been monstrous and evil, using descriptions that are painfully reminiscent of how real-world groups have been and continue to be denigrated. We understand the urgency of changing how we work to better ensure a more inclusive game. Effective immediately, we will remove the offensive content about Hadazee in our digital versions, and these will no longer be included in future reprints of the book. Our priority is to make things right when we make mistakes. In addition, we've initiated a thorough internal review of the situation and will take all the necessary actions as a result of that review. We are eternally grateful for the ongoing dialogue with the D&D community, and we look forward to introducing new, engaging, and inclusive content to D&D for generations to come. D&D teaches that diversity is strength, for only a diverse group of adventurers can overcome the many challenges a D&D story presents. In that spirit, we are committed to making D&D as welcome and inclusive as possible. This part of our work will never end. Now, I will say, I give them credit for just coming out, owning it, and not making too much of an excuse. Um, you know, they made the excuse, but at least they're like, hey, you know, we owned it. It doesn't excuse anything. Like, this never should have happened. Any responsible, like, I mean, for God's sake, they make millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars a year. You can't let this kind of thing happen. You just can't. Incompetence is the only answer here, you know. And
Yeah.
I hate to throw that kind of shade, but that's the only reasonable response. There's either incompetence or malice, and I don't believe it was malice. Those are the only two options, I think.
Isn't there a whole phrase about blame not on malice what can be more easily explained by incompetence?
Maybe.
I think I'm paraphrasing a little bit there, but I think that is a phrase that is fairly common.
I have never heard it, but I agree with it. Like a bunch of idiots is the only way this happens. And, you know, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I don't like calling people idiots, but that's clearly what this is. Like, we just had this conversation. We just had it. Come on. You all made
Well,
such a big deal about sensitivity readers and DEI and all this stuff. Come on.
and like you're the 10,000-pound gorilla in the room. Like, do the work. Do the work.
You have to set the example. You're the industry leader.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be the paragon that everyone looks up to because you are the one leading everything.
Yeah. And it's just, it shocks me. And like, I'll give a little bit of a behind the curtain parallel to my life for some of this, but you know, I work professionally as an editor, and I've been in situations where I've been editing stuff and I'll catch something in it, um, and it'll make me take a pause for a second, and I have to go back, do a little research, and realize that there's actually like a racial sensitivity issue there. But the only reason I noticed it is because just like a weird collection of experiences that I've had in my life that allow me to know that like this is maybe a signal of something that I need to go look at. And for a lot of editors, especially folks with less experience, um, those triggers aren't going to fire in your brain, and you're going to read something as innocuous that it really isn't. Um, a a good example of this that I actually just remembered. This was sort of a legendary classified ad that ran many decades ago in a newspaper, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember it exactly. But basically, somebody published a classified ad that said like McKinley, Lincoln, or like Lincoln, McKinley, Kennedy, or whatever. It was all the presidents who'd been assassinated, and I think this was before. This was either after. I think this might have been after Hinckley shot Reagan, but Reagan survived. And somebody bought this classified ad. It got published in the paper the next day and it's very clearly a threat on the president's life. Um, and the publisher had to, and I feel like this was in the 80s. You know, if anybody else out there knows the answer, correct me, but I'm just sort of half remembering the story, but I know it's accurate. And the publisher had to like put out a letter the next day that's like, oh my God, like, I'm sorry, like we wouldn't have done this. And he totally threw the classified person under the bus. Is like the person who answered the phone and took the ad did not understand the significance of the names grouped together and what it meant. So that kind of thing happens when you have, and I'm not even going to call a person stupid, but you just have somebody who's not culturally aware who's doing that kind of work. It can happen. And that's not an excuse because you need, like, especially in Wizards case, because they've specifically talked about hiring people for their cultural awareness for this kind of editing, because sensitivity reading and sensitivity editing they're a specialized thing in editing, right? So that's not an excuse for them. And I'm just relating my experience because like even I've seen that stuff happen in the relatively innocuous content that I'm editing for a living. You know, it can come up anywhere because in a country with centuries upon centuries of racial injustices and inequalities, like it's woven into the fabric of society. It's everywhere. You can't look too far from yourself without seeing its effects or seeing something that's going to cause some effects from it. You have to be so critical. I always tell my folks, my team, like you have to edit critically. You can't just sit there and be hung up on commas and periods and semicolons and passive voice versus active voice. You have to actively be critical of what you're reading and understand what it means or what it could mean to another person. And it's really difficult, especially if somebody with less experience is reading it. If I had to put money on it, I would say that the editing team with Wizards that handled the Hadazee stuff, because you have to think that so many of these things are broken up into chunks. There's probably a team dealing with like a couple of particular races, dealing with all writing and editing all the lore of it. Some are dealing with other stuff. Some are writing quest lines, things like that. I would bet you anything the team that was reading the Hadazee stuff, probably in their mid to late 20s, maybe early 30s. I'm going to generalize. I'm thinking because they're in their mid to late 20s, perhaps early 30s, and working for Wizards, they probably have come from maybe not a privileged background, but a pretty well-off background. So they probably aren't as aware of these kind of things that you need to be thinking about when you're doing work like this. They probably aren't critical editors. They're probably like proofreaders. They're probably copy editors. They're not doing real critical upfront like content editing. And I think it's probably just because they lacked the experience for that. And and if that's the case, Wizards dropped the ball by not having some sort of senior editorial approval process on there. I'm just speculating, but just based on my couple of decades of the business, that's probably what happened, because I see it now that I'm older, now that I'm like a senior editor, essentially. I see it. I see things now in folks in their 20s who work for me that I look at them and I see myself 20 years ago with the stuff that I didn't know and the stuff that I wasn't aware of, and I wasn't drawing lines between things. So it's very common, and I would almost bet anything that that's what happened here.
Even so, the solution is simple. Use your diversity readers, because
Yeah.
that's what they're there for.
Yeah, like even if what I said is absolutely true and what happened, like your final check should be that editor. That editor they should be involved throughout the process, looking at drafts before things get too far down a road that you don't want it to get down. But then they should also have, like, right along with the creative director, they should have a final sign off on this stuff, because it's going to
Yep.
save you from getting yourself in trouble.
Yep.
So I'm flabbergasted by the whole thing. I cannot believe this happened. It is so disappointing.
Yep.
So
And it's the sort of thing where it's like, how many more mistakes are you going to make before you really understand the importance of what you're doing as an organization?
yeah,
Or if you understand the importance of what you're doing as an organization, how are things like this still slipping through the cracks?
yeah, it's amazing. Jeremy Crawford, if you want to come on the Goblins and Growlers podcast and talk to us about that, we're happy to have you, and we'll send you some free G&G swag if you want.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us about the process. Tell us about how this occurred.
Yeah, we would love to know. We'd love to know. Like I said, I've got a lot of experience in publications and editing, so I can talk shop about it,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah.
So anyways, those were our 4 news updates for the day. So now we're fully caught up with everything that happened while we were taking a little bit of a break there. And I got a lot of opinions out. So I'm going to sleep a little bit easier tonight, because they're not all welling up in my brain ready to fire out like a laser.
Yeah,
I don't know about you.
I think having expressed as much anger as I just did, I feel a little bit calmer as a person. You know, like
Yeah.
I feel like I've let something go.
Yeah. I feel, in fact, calm enough to telephone, telegraph, tell a friend about the Goblins and Growlers podcast and let them know what a great program we've got here. I also feel calm enough to maybe follow you at Black Cloak DM on Twitter.
Oh, I feel calm enough to follow you at Way of Brandalore on Twitter.
And I think to relax, I'm going to go listen to our sister podcast, Quid Pro Roll, an actual play 5th edition D&D adventure in which I play an over-the-hill pro wrestler who's a triple multiclasser named Charles Gravy Boat Barnes.
Yeah, as I understand it, that's the only actual play podcast that is completely created by a cast of all professional DMs.
Correct. And we just happen to be some of those professional DMs.
Hell yeah.
What else? Oh, for our Halloween content, I know if you listen to a couple episodes back, you're probably wondering why this episode we're not doing the Satanic Panic. Is because we decided that we wanted to read some books ahead of that, so we gave ourselves a little bit of extra time. So what we're going to do is sandwich our 2 Satanic Panic episodes around Halloween, so you get this nice All Hallows meat in between 2 content pieces of bread. So we're going to have the Satanic Panic discussion that's going to come out 2 weeks from today, and then 2 weeks after that we'll have our review of the Tom Hanks TV movie classic Mazes and Monsters.
A classic that I hear is going to make me really mad.
I don't know anything about it other than it's just bad and dumb and what you would expect from a 1982 television movie. starring
My
a young Tom Hanks.
my hope is that it's bad and dumb in the same way that Dark Dungeons is bad and dumb, which is a film that is made almost shot for shot based on a chick track about Dungeons and Dragons,
That's
which
next
I'll be
Halloween.
excited. I'll be excited to talk about chick tracks in our Satanic Panic episode.
Yeah, we should do just a whole thing on Dark Dungeons and chick tracks next year. But
Yes, get
yeah.
deep.
I think the difference there is Dark Dungeons was made tongue in cheek about something that was made sincerely. And I believe Mazes and Monsters was made sincerely as well, because it was in the 80s and you're not getting some satirical movie on ABC, straight to TV movie. But anyway, so that's coming up. That's coming up in the next couple episode releases. There, we're very excited about that. We've got our content plan sort of for the rest of the year. And then we'll get into some fun stuff in January. Also, just as a little bit of news, Alex, the DM of Quid Pro Roll and Josh's comic book store owning fiance, she and I are going to be trying out a new podcast that does not yet have a name, but it's going to be about public domain comic books from the 40s. So we're going to do some recording on that real soon, and we'll have some news on that if that's kind of your bag. I know it's not necessarily a 100% crossover to this kind of audience, but we just wanted to try something a little bit different. So when that's ready to come out, we'll have some news about that, and we'll let you know where to get it. But I'm kind of excited about trying something a little bit different.
I'm going to say Alex has been talking to me about a couple of these characters, and I don't consider myself like big into comic books, which I think I realize is weird given that, I'm engaged to a comic book store owner, but I just haven't really followed comics that much. Superhero culture in general, sure, but like comics not as much. Some of the characters that Alex has told me about finding sound amazing. Like, I think I would listen to this show even if I was like, well, I don't really like comics that much, just because the characters are so off the wall goofy.
Did she tell you about Dr. Hormone?
No, she was telling me about what was it? Not Kitten Man.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Black Kitten.
Yeah. She texted me about that earlier today. But yeah, it should be dumb and fun, and it's not going to be an hour and 15 minutes long like this podcast. But yeah, and also Noah, if you're listening to this, sorry we didn't invite you on to talk about lawsuits, but we literally didn't think about it until we were getting ready to record.
He'll forgive us. He always forgives us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so tell friends about the podcast. Give us some reviews on podcast platforms. 5-star reviews are awesome. They help more people discover the podcast. And like I said, another way to help people discover the podcast is to tell them about it. Send them a link to it. Spam them with links for it. What else? What am I missing?
I think the only things you haven't talked about are the Discord, which you can come hang out and chat with us, bit.ly/Goblin Discord, and also the Patreon, patreon.com/GoblinsGrowlers, where we get a bunch of lovely, lovely folks to help us afford the equipment that we use to record all these really zany podcasts we do.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think it's 10:30. I think it's time to sign off because I'm very tired and I'm out of coffee.
I was gonna say out of the recording studio and into bed. That's where we're headed,
but not together.
I mean, tonight.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Bye, y'all.